All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you join us here today. This conversation, recalibrating leadership in the age of AI, human collaboration, is a hot topic. It's what we know a lot of the organizations that we work closely with or are a part of are focusing on clearly a transformation that is digital, but equally having conversations, hopefully, and that's what we're going to talk about today, about the role that we as humans play in this transformation of the digital space, the digital world, but also, of course, navigating an AI world in general. I'm Marie Unger. I have the honor of being the CEO at Emergenetics International, and I am, again, thrilled to have you all with us today. I'm going to take a moment to introduce the three absolutely amazing panelists that we are proud to have with us today. So I guess what we'd like to do is I'll start with you, Krish. Krish, I'll have you join screen with us. Let me talk a little bit about you, Krish. It's fun to do so. Krish is the director of MARG Business Transformation. Krish, my friend, you bring more than 3 decades, can't believe that. 3 decades, though, Krish, of experience in finance and strategic leadership, which, of course, then has helped Krish build expertise in change management, which I think is great as we talk about this today, system dynamics, culture change, and leadership development. So, hello, Krish, and welcome.
Hello, Murray, and hello everyone else who's joined in.
Fabulous. Thank you for being here. All right, Raymond, your turn. We're going to bring you on screen. Raymond Thomas. He's managing partner at Enable, where he facilitates these leadership boot camps. Can't wait to hear a little bit more about that for both emerging and senior leaders. He helps organizations strengthen company culture as well. Now, similar, my word, the skill and experience on the screen. Raymond has more than 35 years of leadership and consulting experience, and is an expert at guiding the high performance across all cross-cultural teams. So welcome, Raymond. It's great to have you here with us.
Thanks, Murray. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the session.
Fabulous. All right. And then, of course, our final panelist we're going to welcome to the screen is Annie Browning. Annie is an important part of the Emergenx ecosystem and a brilliant mind herself. She runs her own successful leadership development practice. She works with founders, executives, and teams. She is, I love this, a consciousness researcher. She's a psychotherapist and founder of the GAZE method, which I'm excited to hear a little bit more about, but a proprietary protocol that it empowers leaders to navigate all the uncertainty in the world that we're all facing, but to do so with clarity, with steadiness, and it's all using cognitive neuroscience. So, welcome, Annie.
Thank you, Marie, and delighted to be here.
And Annie wins the prize for those of you that are joining us, as Annie has joined us from the United States on the East Coast. So it is 11 p.m. Welcome, Annie. I'm grateful you look so fresh.
I am awake.
It's remarkable.
It is a miracle. Yes.
All right. Well, clearly, I have prepared a few questions for all of you. And so we'll take some opportunities where we get to hear from all of you. And this first one, I do want to hear from all three of you as we ask it. And by the way, for the participants, when you have questions, please, as they come to you, type them in the question section there on this webinar. We have a team that's going to be helping us to make sure we get those all gathered. And at the end, we hope we'll have time to be able to answer a few of these questions. If we don't, please know that because we have that team that's helping us behind the scenes there, your question will get answered. So when the question comes to you, go ahead and put it in the chat, although we will be answering the questions at the end of our panel conversation here today. So let's go ahead and dive in. I think we're ready to go. I'm going to start with you, Raymond, but again, this is a question that I want for all three of us. So basically, here's the thing. So much has changed for leaders in the past few years, right? We've got the hybrid and remote work environments. We've got 5 generations in the workplace today. You have to navigate that. We've got volatile market dynamics that we're trying to, respond to. And of course, now we've got this AI integration. My question is, how do you see these shifts changing the expectations, or basically, how are they already changing the expectations and the roles of leaders today? So, Raymond, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Mary, for the question. I've got two words for you, and they both start with F. It's fast and it's furious, right? And I think what's happening out there, you've mentioned this, you talked about volatility, you've talked about lack of predictability, lack of certainty. And as leaders, one of the things that's really important for them is to be able to assess what's happening around them. Looking at the macro environmental forces, connecting with their networks, trying to find out what's really happening, what are people trying to do, what are other leaders trying to do, so that they can get a control of what's happening around them. And that's what leaders need to do. They just need to be uncomfortable in this pace of fast and furious.
Fast and furious. Boy, does that seem how things are coming to us. And Krish, I'm curious how you might respond to that. I saw you're about to jump in, so I'm going to let you go. How would you respond to that?
100% agreed with what Raymond said. And the interesting thing for me is that the fast and furious part that he spoke about, it's happening both on the obvious stuff and the non-obvious stuff. Meaning, as a leader, I'm sitting in my cabin and I'm in my meetings, and what's coming at me fast and furious is the projects, is the insistence of all my stakeholders that I do something different and I do something better. So that's my customers, who are very well educated on what tech can do, what my org can do, regulators who are worried about what I can do, my vendors who are waiting for me to do something so they can match pace, and my employees hoping that everything's going well. All this is visible stuff. And then there's invisible stuff, which is also fast and furious, which is happening outside my cabin, which is where the multi-generational workforce is sitting, which is where differential expectations of the organization on what makes for a good job is sitting, which is where I need to work from, how I need to work, what does a team mean. All those definitions are changing. Also changing fast and furious, but not as visible to that leader. And the cost I think leaders are paying from an expectation perspective is they're substituting speed for strategy. They are substituting speed for reflection, because the visible stuff coming at them is projects. And so it's do faster, do faster, do faster. And the invisible stuff that comes up, say, once a year, when I do an employee engagement survey, when I do a partnership meeting with my vendors, or I go meet my customers every 6 months. It's in those moments that I realize, oh, that's something happening there too. So expectations, back to what you asked, I think the expectations are getting unreasonably humongous for leaders, and leaders are perhaps not making the best choices in that context.
Yeah, I mean the challenges that to both what both of you are saying, the speed, everything that's coming us from all stakeholders really, plus to your point, the visible and the invisible things that are happening kind of behind the scenes. And Annie, I know for you, this volatility, this uncertainty is in your wheelhouse of helping people. So talk a little bit from your perspective about what you see for the expectations and the roles for leaders.
Sure. Christian, Raymond, you've named so beautifully the context we're in, that we are in a season of prolonged uncertainty. What's interesting about this moment in time is as a people collectively, we've known how to navigate shorter seasons of uncertainty, and now we're looking sort of endemically at these prolonged seasons of uncertainty that likely are not going to change for a period of time. So that's where I would start with is we'll call it the new normal. Is likely a level setting of an expectation that this is where we are and this is where we're going to be. So then the skill set that is required of leaders is actually at a different, what we would call a different state, in psychology at least, a different perceptual capacity that can be trained and facilitated for all of us to begin to learn. And that's really what I focus on. But I'll say two things that I notice that I believe leaders are being invited to step into right now. Because we have a volume of information coming at us, and often it's information that's incomplete, right? We are not able to make decisions based on complete information that would give us everything that we need to know in order to make very coherent and clear decisions. So in that way, that skill is being able to, we call it discernment, or again, it's a skill of perception, to be able to weed through information, know what is incomplete, and choose not to rush to preemptive conclusions too quickly, knowing when we need more time, when we do need to make rapid decisions based on what we know at the moment. And that leads to the second skill, which is that many leaders, I believe, are becoming more sense makers, where you are making sense of what is present at the moment, what is known, equally what is not known. And that is a very advanced skill. Chris, you said it well, on a practical level. How do you engage in the day-to-day of business operations, knowing that at times you are kind of in the fog, and yet you are finding clarity in the fog based on the information that is known at a moment in time? And that takes real wisdom, because we don't have a complete picture, and we're not going to.
Mm.
And that's probably the new normal that I would stress.
Yeah, it's that permanent whitewater, right? It's
Yep.
constantly churning. And Annie, I want to keep kind of staying with what you were saying. So, you talked about how important it is for leaders to almost like choose not to act and choose to be really responsible in the way they navigate this. Talk more about some of those capabilities or mindsets that you see will be essential in the leaders as they
Mhm.
navigate this uncertainty in this world of whitewater.
Yeah, so part of my work is to look at, essentially, we could call it just the milieu we're in, trends, market forces, right? That there's a sense of acceleration. When we're in certainty, we actually have a sense of time speeding up. Is time literally speeding up? No. If we look at it metrically, it is not speeding up. But our perception of time actually starts to speed up. In that way, we tend to match it. We feel like there's a sense of urgency that starts to increase as well. So, my recommendation, what I often work with is, as urgency increases, we can practice, and of course, we use a lot of regulation techniques and other techniques that I use in the gaze method, where we are actively slowing down in response. And it can seem very counterintuitive, because as pace speeds up, we think that we need to speed up to somehow move, kind of leapfrog beyond advances that are happening. But what we know, and this is often, this is replicated in neuroscience and in research, is that the most agile leaders are the ones that actually set a different pace or tone that is not reacting to the inputs or the information, but that is actually choosing to, you could say, ingest, process, perceive at a slower pace that is more measured. And that requires real skill, because we're not immune to the pace of change.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it started with Raymond saying Fast and Furious. And Krish, I'm
Hmm.
thinking about some of your expertise in change management and how leaders, we're talking about all this change. How would you contribute to some of those other mindsets or the capabilities that are becoming essential?
So I guess there are two things in play at this point in my head, and I'm riffing off what Annie just said now, right? The way she said it, it sounded to me like when I'm someone reporting into that leader, I would like to meet that leader and feel time dilating for me. I
Yeah.
would like to
Mm.
feel that I'm in the eye of the storm and I can leave what I thought about behind and slow down and have that conversation, right? That's where we'd like to go. And for that, the leader needs to have some sense of control. And speaking on the subject of change, I'm finding that very often in our practice, most leaders are struggling with multiple changes being chucked at them, changes that they didn't design, changes that they didn't foresee. And hence, at that point, they have a significant sense of loss of control and they feel almost like managers in that context, right?
Mm.
They now in that environment start feeling a little powerless, so to say, and almost guiding their teams in the sense of, look, I need to do it, you need to do it, to just take it off my table and make it on your table and make it happen, which doesn't necessarily help anyone, is one part of it. I think the other element I would call out from a change perspective is and critical capability, therefore, for your leader is how do you define the end state for projects that you didn't spawn, for projects that came from elsewhere in the organization? What level of control do you exercise? How much do you involve yourself? How much do you commit yourself? And how do your teams experience that commitment of yours? We are working with an organization just now, and the leader has been parachuted into the role, has been told, fix them fix them and make them ready for the future. And man, that's a terrible expectation set of that leader. And that's the environment they are in. And as a capability, all we are helping that leader build is trust. Build trust upwards, downwards, and then the large organization. Coach your teams to gain that trust. And we're trying to do all that in an environment of trying to help that leader regain control. So I'm hoping that makes sense, right? I couldn't help but to speak to what Annie said. The whole idea over here is let the leader then become the eye of the storm, where there is some calm that people can use, can refresh, re-energize themselves, and head back out on. That makes sense,
Yeah.
Murray?
Yeah, completely. Fabulous. Yeah. I'm thinking actually it's kind of interesting. You're doing a brilliant job segueing into what I was going to check in with you, Raymond, on, because I know I'm familiar with your three C's, Raymond, and kind of the concept of consultant, coach, and companion. But I hear two other C's, which was control for you, and then what was the other one you just said? There was control and
Trust, I was saying, building over trust and change management, of course.
Or if you want to
okay, yeah,
see coherence, that's a good one.
coherence.
If you need that
We
word
can
C.
come up with all sorts
Yeah,
of C's.
so many C's.
So many C's. But in particular, it got me thinking about the nuances about and how they all are weaving together. And so, Raymond, I do want to hear about your three C's, if you don't mind, kind of diving into what you think, how they play into these capabilities and mindsets as well.
Mhm. Thanks, Marie, for asking that question. You're talking about capabilities and mindsets, and one of the things that's in my mind right now is the fact that leaders are managing, leaders are addressing issues that they have never addressed before. So there's no benchmark, there's no outcome, there's no a fixed solution that they're working towards, right? And I totally agree with what Annie said and what Krish talks about in terms of how they need to not just manage the new normal, but I think co-create the new normal together with their teams in terms of how they can move forward. Leaders are put in positions because they need to make decisions, because they need to draw insights out of information that they are getting, because they have to rewire their mental models. They need to come up with new mental models. They need to influence people around them so that they can continue to fine tune in terms of their mental models so that they can move forward. Right. And I think I really think that the role of a leader is evolving. I'm just delighted that we have the 5 C's. But I wanna talk really quickly about the leader's role in terms of number one, being a companion. How can the leader be a companion? That's a totally different space from being a leader, from being a manager. Right. And Krish nailed it when he said that there needs to be trust. There needs to be psychological safety between two individuals so that they can continue to work together towards being coherent to what the organization wants to accomplish. The second thing is consultant, right? How can leaders continue to be a consultant to their team members rather than jumping in there and telling them how to do it, what to do? It's like having an engagement with them, conversation with them, and asking them how are you going to achieve this. Right? What are some bottlenecks that you anticipate? What are some assumptions that you're making? So just asking those powerful questions. And the last one is to be an effective coach, right? And being an effective coach is always going to be important for the leader. I think many organizations are just embracing the coaching culture because that's how we're going to move forward. We've got these 5 generations out there. Mind you, Marie, I'm seeing that all of them think differently and not necessarily they can be coherent. they converge towards an outcome. So there's a lot of that coaching, there's a lot of that facilitation that needs to continue happening, that leaders need to have in mind, that their roles are not just to direct people what to do, but to facilitate how people come together in terms of working out a solution.
Wow, yeah, thank you. I was jotting down those three C's, and it made me think about, we used to have this like factory mentality where it was very top down. It was you do as I'm told. And just earlier today, I was engaged in a conversation where we were talking about mass personalization and this almost expectation of a personalized experience. And what I'm hearing you say is when you have a companion, a consultant, and a coach, that that opportunity allows the individual to not feel so top down, but to be a contributing part of solutioning. And I jotted that down. That was outstanding. Okay, so you three, you've talked about what leaders need. Now, what I would like to hear is what are you seeing as the gaps? In other words, as you're working with leaders, what are you seeing as those skills that they're struggling with the most to adapt to? And Krish, why don't you jump in first this time?
A couple of thoughts. Once, but having heard Raymond speak about the C's, I'm tempted to go to the D's.
This will be a great webinar. We'll just go, oh, we've got 26. Well, depending on where you live, we got a lot more letters in the alphabet too. Who knows?
Thought in my mind as you were speaking was two comments. One is, yes, it's an environment which invites leader to direct and dominate. And in the meanwhile, besides all the other changes we've been speaking about, organizational structures have changed. Most organizations have a matrixed structure, which means very often a leader is not the direct superior of the people who they're working with. They can't necessarily tell them anymore. Many of the people who are working with them are people who are probably more senior or who have been vying for the same role, or their peers, or they have greater credibility, a bank of credibility in the organization. And it is in that environment that I see, in terms of what gaps are we helping leaders try and fix, I see leaders needing to allow a certain level of divergence, right? And I'm leaning back on emergentics and how we speak about convergence and divergence. Leaders need to lean into the fact that there is going to be multiple points of view and they cannot jump to what is the right answer and who has the right answer is not the way it's going to play out. And that's why what Raymond is saying on being a companion, being a consultant, being able to facilitate those conversations makes so much sense, right? And these are areas where a leader may not necessarily have a skill set. They may not have grown that way. They may not have been groomed for that. And the good news over here, Marie, is I'm finding most leaders taking support from HR. I see HR reclaiming its place as a people expert function, a function that's a steward for the organization's policies and is able to be a guide and a coach to the leader. So I'm seeing those positive developments. I'm seeing HR and CEOs having a very, very positive partnership. The best part for me is in those partnerships, I find HR has stopped needing to speak the business language to gain credibility, and leaders are welcoming HR speaking in the language of, well, these are human beings, and these human beings have this needs, and this is how you need to meet them in your role as a leader, in your role as a manager, in your role as a colleague. So I'm saying, I guess, both. One is the need for leaders to fill the gap of being someone who accepts multiple opinions, lets divergence happen before answers come about, and taking the support of an expert where it's required.
I love I love what you're saying because I think the concept of making sure that there's this I don't want to say return. You mentioned that HR is reclaiming its space. You know, there's so much energy that's being put towards the transformation digitally, but to make sure that that people piece is happening as well. So, and Raymond, I know you've talked about that yourself. So why don't you kind of add to what Chris was saying there? And Raymond, you happen to be on mute. I just wanted to let you know. Just there you go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're good.
I just wanted to share. I think there's a lot of for lack of a better word, there's a lot of noise on this thing that people are calling AI. All right, artificial intelligence. I think organizations are looking towards AI as a tool that's going to help them leapfrog their competitors, leapfrog and predetermine what the needs of the customers are, right? Efficiency is important, effectiveness is important, productivity is important, and it's like the buzzword, right? So I feel like there's a lot of focus going into AI, and 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 other areas. I feel leaders are getting distracted, right? And that is the whole human element, the human element of working with people, trying to find out what is important to them. I've had 3 conversations from this morning to about a week back, and everyone's talking about this whole nature of how because it's fast and furious, because we don't know what to do, because there is compensation, there's rewards out there, there's a certain level of competitiveness that's within the organization where people are now competing with each other internally rather than to put on that hat of being collaborative. Right. I think the emphasis needs to be there. We need to be more collaborative. Yes, I know we are trying to get to AI. We want to squeeze out of AI as much as we can. But at the same time, how can we do it together? How can we learn together? How can we grow together? How can we scale together? One organization that I was talking to this morning, they're just changing the organization. They're reorganizing, and they are looking at how to build a more effective talent and culture ecosystem within the organization itself, right? So, and that is to put support for the leaders and also for the teams to continue to function in the most optimized way, so that they can help to meet the needs of the organization. So I see a lot of that happening, and I feel that we need to continue to focus on the people element while we are focusing on the AI component.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking, you mentioned kind of this competitive individual I'm out for me to a need to be much more collaborative. And I know Annie, you've got some great opinions and thoughts on that one. So I'm gonna let you take that and run.
Sure. Well, I love what's being said so far and agree with you wholeheartedly, Raymond, that there's such a culture of extraction, control, efficiency, speed. Sometimes I wonder to what end, right? We all have targets we want to hit, but sometimes our mechanisms of getting there have consequences as well, which leads to your question, Marie. I mean, I do believe that leaders are being asked to develop perception. And I talk about a lot because perception precedes thinking and behaving if we look at the emergenetics model. So when we actually develop perceptual tools to actually take in more information and be able to process it, then our sense making, which I know I referred to before, but I believe leaders are going to become more agile in their ability to help us make sense of what is happening in our context, to make decisions, and to lead even with, I mentioned before, some of the incomplete information. 3 distinct skills that I work with over and over again with individuals and teams that relate to these constructs are this idea of being an attuned leader, which is not just emotional attunement, being able to actually read, not just read the room, read others, read systems accurately, and being able to also read in between the lines of not just what's being said, but what's not being said, what is happening that perhaps we're not paying attention to. The second one is entrainment, which is actually very body-based. Chris, you talked about being the eye in the center of the storm. I mean, that is entrainment. We know physiologically that how we are when we walk in a room, when we are working on a project actively changes the physiology of our teams. And that is also a skill that can be trained and taught and facilitated. And the third one really is around alignment and attunement, not looking just at the individual, but we know that when we have not just physiological alignment, but what we would call more alignment in terms of our consciousness, it directly affects also the alignment of teams and systems, actually how we get something done together. So in summary, I would say that these human skills, these people skills, I believe are also being up-leveled in a way in terms of intelligence. And when we look at many models of intelligence, there's one intelligence in particular that I believe is going to become paramount in our future, which is what we call existential intelligence, going back to this idea of meaning making, that the leaders that will thrive and take some very distinct forward steps, and we see this in pattern throughout history, are the ones that help us derive meaning, purpose, value, mission, all of those kind of big concepts, but actually concretize it in a way that others can come behind and get a sense of. And that level of existential thinking, we know in history, when we have these kinds of seasons of turmoil, it's existential intelligence that starts to become a driver in terms of where we go together.
Hmm. I'm the gaps, obviously, as a leader myself, I think about, okay, what do I need to be doing to upskill myself? And sometimes with all the conversation about what is needed and what it will take feels a little daunting. But all three of you have just shared such an optimistic perspective of we can do that, we can be there. Annie, your words, we're going to be up leveled. It just is such an optimistic sign of encouragement that says, as a leader, stick with it. Leadership is hard, but recognize the importance of continuing to upscale, up level where you're coming from. So, speaking of that, I have to imagine that in this new world of AI, and given all of the three of your expertise and the programs and the work that you have developed to support leaders in over the years, but especially now in this really changing time, how are you changing your programs? Just out of curiosity, the things you've already done, how are you changing those so that you can reflect these new realities of work? Krish, why don't we go with you?
Um, Fair question, and sorry, I'm still thinking about what Annie said. Um, there's a lovely
I
line from a person named Tom Fidderman. He's a leader in the systems dynamic space, and he's running a blog, and the blog's tagline says, "Don't just do something, just stand there." And I think it fits in beautifully with many things that Annie said, that need for reflection, need for thought. So that's playing in my mind as I respond to your question, Murray. I think the biggest changes that we have made over the last few years is our programs are no longer about solving one problem. We are seeing the fact that while we have those leaders in the room, we have an opportunity to help them zoom out, look at the problem in the context of where it came from and what it's impacting, and then zoom into, okay, here's solution one, two, three, right? We are finding leaders are way more patient with being taken through the thought process in a meaningful way. There used to be there still is a popular misconception that leaders don't necessarily lean into getting trained or educated. That's false. I find leaders are far more open to getting educated, especially because many of them have got promoted to those positions without being prepared for it. So they are hungry for better models, better way of looking at things. So we're seeing that part. It's not just one thing anymore. Second part is technology is a critical part of all training. Yes, they all have LMSs back home, but something that we can give them back as an app, as a ready-to-use tool, as a ready-to uh, converse with kind of tool is useful for them. I'm going to take the Emergentics app for an example, right? It's not just doing the session, but you also walk away and say, okay, I'm going to talk to X next. And when I talk to X next, when I talk to Murray next, what do I need to keep in mind? Right? So things like that make a huge difference to how leaders are able to practice what we give them after. Third element, and the last element, is the after part, right? It's no longer once and done. there is a continuity of engagement, and good or bad, the digital world has allowed us to stay in contact with individual leaders.
Mhm.
So as a natural evolution, right now we work with a group of leaders collectively, and subsequent to the program, we're working with them individually, right? And that's something we were not able to do, both for logistical reasons as well as leaders giving time, but that's again changed. Notice, Murray, everything that I'm saying is about not what we have done necessarily to change our programs, but the receptivity of leaders to rethink how they do leadership. And I think that is my number one point. Leaders are amazing to work with. Um,
Yeah,
there we
Raymond, I see you definitely agreeing. So jump in. What would you say?
It's I totally agree with Krish. I think for us, how are our programs changing? Um, I think the first thing I can think about is we are collaborating, we are curating, we are designing programs together with the leaders in mind itself. Right, that's what we are trying to do right now. It's not just walking in there and saying, "Hey, I'm the expert. I know everything, and this is what you guys need to do." But it's more on a collaborative. I keep using that word collaborative again, but I think that's an important thing for us. For us, it's about designing learning journeys. For us, it's about designing learning expeditions. For us, it's about going out there, making their role as a leader more holistic, more fulfilling, right? And that's basically what we are trying to do right now. I really like what Krish talks about. It's no longer just looking at talent development. I think the future is going to be looking at team development and organizational development. It's like taking a step forward and helping leaders and organizations to manage what they are truly managing in the organization itself. So I feel that that's where it's going. That's where Enable is moving towards, right? We want to focus more on team development. We want to focus more on organizational development so that we can add value at the end of the day. And I think it's pretty much in alignment with what Annie and Krish is also trying to say, right? We have to change. It's not just if we don't change. I think this is a metaphor that I always use with my clients. I can't even pace my clients anymore. I can't be pacing my clients and walking together with them. They basically would say that this is useless. They want us to be of them, right? We have to be ahead of them so that they can see the true value, the true creativity, the true innovation that we are bringing to them so that they will consider themselves growing.
Yeah, it's kind of that balance between what used to be called like the sage on the stage, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but knowing that the growth has to come from within. And so again, kind of coming back to, that facilitative importance and building something that leaders will respond to. So Annie, what about you? What are you doing with
Hmm.
some of your programs?
Well, it's like Raymond, you provided the perfect segue for
I
what I was
know.
going to say. So what you just modeled there is how I approach AI. You know, AI is really beneficial in terms of speed and optimization and pattern recognition. I really lean into it for some helpful analysis in terms of especially recognizing some disparate patterns. But what you just said there, Raymond, when you were kind of predicting what might become future trends, AI does not do that very well as of right now. And that's where I believe, speaking of up-leveling humanity, part of our greatest gift as humans is our capacity to not just predict and anticipate, but also we'll call it dream of
Mm,
lean into what could be, start to maximize potential and possibility beyond just these very set predictability pathways about what might come true. So what you just did there is part of our human capacity of actually taking a little bit of a step ahead and leaning into what could be, and not just analytically, but also, of course, intuitively and somatically. More concretely, I approach AI in my work of looking in a very analytic way of what skill sets what mechanisms of delivery, based on where AI excels, can be optimized without reducing the impact and the effectiveness and the transformational power of what I offer. I have found as I've leaned into agentic AI, all forms of AI that I've woven into my business, at times, to be honest, we all have to take a look in the mirror and recognize that there's aspects that I would have built my identity on, saying, boy, this is what I do and I do it really well, and nothing or no one can do it like me, in a very egoic way. And then to watch AI optimize, it's a healthy moment of acknowledging where we can also lean into growth edges, which is how I've approached it, of where can I up-level my skills, my capacities, my perception, and also lean into the opportunity of where there can also be some more, it's not always there, but time in my schedule, ways for deeper reflection, moments for accessing some of those predictive capacities for where we might be going that will serve my clients. Because you said it beautifully, Raymond, that's what they want. That's what they're asking for. And that, I believe, is such a niche and an opportunity for us to step into as AI continues to be a significant driver in our industries.
I will tell you the humility that has to come in navigating AI is a is a huge factor. So, okay, well, I have to ask this question, and honestly, I'm super excited to ask this question from my role, and that is, why do you think that the work that we do at Emergenetics is such a healthy contributor to navigating all of this, to the skills that are needed, to the gaps that we're experiencing, to the programs, et cetera? Why do you think it's so important in leadership development? So, and I want to hear from all three of you for sure on this one. Of course, I do. So, Annie, we'll start with you, and then we'll probably go Christian Raymond. Just I want to hear about why you think emergenetics plays such a vital role in what we can do for leaders.
At its base, Emergenetics is an incredibly valuable tool in not just creating self-understanding, shared understanding, team understanding. The experience, I'll say, is also paramount in that. One thing I love about Emergenetics is it's one thing to take an assessment. It's another thing to have the Emergenetics experience that creates a shared culture and embraces that level of understanding for individuals and teams. I think that is such a competitive edge right now. In a world that, again, can feel very information based, to have those lived embodied experiences that truly make a difference, not just in our learning, but also our retention and our embodiment of an experience. And then everything we've talked about today, there is, I believe, a revolution of what we would have called soft skills that are no longer optional. They're going to become the main drivers in how we do our work. And so I believe Emergenetics is well positioned exactly where it is right now to provide such a valuable, meaningful application for so many contexts. It's right on time for what we need in this moment in our history.
Fabulous. We're done. That's great. I'm just teasing. That was awesome. Thank you,
Lots
Annie.
more.
Krish, what about from your perspective? What do you see?
I'm thinking of where we started off with Raymond speaking about Fast and Furious and Annie speaking about uncertainty. It's a lovely environment for people to be confidently wrong. And emergenetics gives a great way for us to say, hey, hang on, that's how I think, that's what my preferences are. I am unconsciously picking and choosing what information is important for me and what I'm choosing to react upon. I think that insight is incredibly valuable for leaders and leadership teams. We use emergenetics in our practice over here very often as a lovely psychometric tool, easy to establish, like Annie said, with a great experience for leadership teams as they embark on a change. Because you want this team to be rock solid, very comfortable with themselves, very comfortable with how they parse the world around them, and then become the pivot around which the organization makes its shift, right? So we find high value in that. And emergenetics, with that degree of um, self-awareness it provides, it definitely leads to reflection, way better than any other tool that I know of. What you end up with is an is a team that gets each other much better than they did before. Invaluable.
And I'm curious, Raymond, given that you're focusing more on teams, what would you say?
I'm just listening to Annie and I'm listening to Krish. Well, first thing I want to say that everyone who joins the organization at Enable gets a complimentary emergenetics profile done. And that's because we value the information that's so importantly that we want to see how that individual would work together eventually as a team. So that's a really important thing for us. Another thing that pretty much hit me, and this is not proven, but I feel like preference could also be a measurement of pride and ego,
Mm.
right? So in other words, if I don't cater to your preference or to an individual's preference, I may be sidetracking what's really important to them too, or what is it that they can bring to the equation. And I think that's a really important thing for me. And I think it was Annie who talked about humility, right? And I think it's kind of like an indirect version of humility. So I recognize what your preference is, and I make sure I check in with you in terms of what's going on in your mind, and make sure that I take that into consideration in everything that we do, right? So I have to say, emergenetics, it's just an amazing tool, but it really helps me. It helps our clients. It helps the team members in the organization to get to know themselves, very important, but also to get to know the other person that they are working with in terms of how do I respond, how do I react to their preferences, and also to put them as a priority in everything that I'm trying to do. So that's the piece for me.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you, the three of you, for indulging me on that. It's clearly I believe it and know what we do for people, but to hear your expertise merge with what we do, that was outstanding. Okay, final question, and then if we have time, I think we maybe have one or two. Actually, there's a couple questions. We'll try to get to a couple, but we'll see. But the final question for you, which means I'm going to ask you to be succinct in your response, is if you could offer one piece of advice to HR teams or consultants who are really wanting to strengthen their own leadership program or programming, what would you say? What would be one piece of advice? So, Raymond, we ended with you. I'm going to start with you this time.
I think one piece of advice is always ask yourself, why are you doing what you're doing? Right? What's the motivation behind it? What is it that's driving it? And it's always important. And Angela Duckworth always talks about grit, right?
Yeah.
How does this align to your passion, and why are you trying to do this? Okay, and that's going back to the basics. Find out what is important to you, find out what's important to your people, and continue to focus on that. And that's my little advice for today.
Wow. Wonderful. Thank you, Annie.
Mm. You know, it all comes back to perception. I would say, in a very simple way, what we pay attention to is what we become. And it's so true. So where and what comes into our field of perception, and some of that is our own choice, going back to even mechanisms of control. Perception is key, and it's time for us to begin to orient to what we want to perceive, how we perceive it, and make some very distinct decisions around that.
Fabulous. All right, Krish, you get to bring it home.
Uh, I'm going to shift to what they can do with clients. Do not assume that what they're calling out as a problem is a problem. It perhaps is a symptom. So challenge their perception, or who's asking you for solutions. Challenge what they think is the problem or the thing is the solution. That's one comment. Don't be afraid to disagree. Don't be afraid to say, what about this? What about that? We are an expert. Again, like I said, this is the time for people who understand people to step up and speak the people language. Don't be enamored, don't be seduced to speak the language of who you're speaking with. Speak your language. Be confident as an HR leader or as a consultant to be in your area of competence and and speak confidently. I guess the third part, and I'm going to slip in emergentics again, is we speak often of the whole brain. Cognitive diversity is invisible. It's not easy to spot. Try and speak to as many people as possible before you say, here is a problem, here's a solution. Before you make that announcement and before you create a program around it, make sure you've spoken to as many people as possible.
Wow. Wow, what a wonderful way to wrap up the question part of this. From my perspective, there are a couple questions and we have just a few moments. So I'm going to throw these out to you and you guys can decide who wants to answer. Just jump right in. So one of the questions I thought was really interesting because one of you kind of mentioned it, but the question is, how do you manage the three E's in an AI world? So we've talked about the three C's. These are the three E's, and it would be ethics, empathy, and emotions. So, how do you manage the three E's in an AI world? Ethics, empathy, and emotions.
Okay, in the interest of not keeping the radio silence running, a couple of thoughts. Uh, Purposeful. I think part of the reason why these three are slipping away or feel like they're slipping away is because organizations don't seem to have the strong center. They have not yet redefined that strong center. What do our values mean in this environment? What do we mean? What does our vision mean and mission mean in this environment? Has not been done. And this is a great time to go back to being purposeful, saying this is what we are, going back to identity. That's important. The other element I would throw in is the fourth E, which is experience, right? Much of these are under pressure because of the experience of the employees in this context. They feel just pressure, 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 and they're not able to parse it in any meaningful way. Going back to sense making that Annie was speaking about, guide the experience. Don't be nervous about saying this is how the next 1 month. This is how I want my employees to experience it. Being purposeful about the experience can be a winner.
I'll jump in
Okay.
and say that the pearl of that question is that what you're naming are capacities that AI currently does not have or do well in terms of, at a foundational level, AI does not have a body. It is not in a human body. And part of those experiences, ethics, emotions, I'm forgetting the last one now. There's another E.
The ethics, empathy, and emotions.
Right. All of those experiences, if we look at them even psychologically, are highly embodied human experiences. So this is another opportunity to that question of there are distinct ways to actually train for increased traits that you're describing there, whether it be emotional attunement, empathy, the ability not just for ethical reason from a cognitive perspective, but we're also talking about there's so many ways of coming at ethics. It's far too complicated to get into it right now. It's a whole nother topic. But just to say that these are distinct, kind of talking about the up-leveling of humanity, these are all skill sets that I think you're naming, hitting the nail on the head of what was needed for us right now at this moment that actually helps us provide something in an AI world that is part of the next wave of humanity. So how to do that? That's a big, big question. What I will say is I think you're naming that this is where we're called to be and what to pay attention to.
Nice. Raymond, do you want
I
to take
just
it
wanted,
go?
yeah, I just wanted to jump in there. And I think I talked a little bit about it earlier, where you have a branch of AI and you have a branch of people, right? So the thing is, how could you focus a little bit more or create a balance? Right, guys? I think creating a balance is always important rather than looking at it as a dualistic approach to it. And if you talk about operationalizing it, one of my favorite ways is how I book my time in my calendar, right? There could be certain days where I focus all on AI. There are certain days where I focus on all three E's, right? And I'm trying to put systems in place to make sure that the three E's are constantly taken care of within the culture of the organization itself. That's just one approach.
Great. Great. Which that actually kind of is a nice segue because I want to piggyback off of that to another there's a couple of questions that have come in, and your word of balance, I think, is what speaks to some of these. So I'm going to do my best to try to synthesize a few of these. And by the way, again, to the audience, if we don't get to all your questions, thank you, by the way. It sounds like we've got a lot of great questions. We do have our team that will make sure we respond to. But this balance is what I want to ask you about, kind of as our, given the time, our final question for today. And that is, how do we know, like when AI comes in, AI can be very disruptive, right? It can be totally disruptive to a culture. And the question is, how do we balance what we've talked about, right? So it's the influence on it that could be effectively controlled or steered to align with our human values. But there's another interesting kind of layer to this that I'm seeing in the question. And how do we balance so that our leaders aren't over relying on AI? What are those indicators or behaviors as well? So that'll be our final question for us to wrap up with tonight.
Go, Krish.
Krish,
Yes.
you're good to go.
Yes.
My 2 cents on it. I think there is over-reliance. I'll talk about the over-reliance and then talk about the balance. Over-reliance for me happens when leaders are confusing AI as a tool to achieve results versus AI as an outcome by itself. Weirdly enough, organizations have invested so much in AI that their first thought process AI as an outcome by itself. Are we all using AI? How much of AI are you using in a day? What ideas have you come up with AI? Give me 10 ideas from AI. And in many organizations, that pressure is seeping through the whole organization and disrupting culture. It's disrupting the way the organization thinks. It starts believing that using AI is an end unto itself versus what AI is supposed to be, right? What that's causing is the reason why I'm saying it's seeping through the organization is it's unweaving the organization is because now an employee starts not seeing that parts of their job which are purely human, that part of their job that needs to be purely automated, and then that AI human collaboration piece. No one is helping them define it, and their own manager is also in a controlled freak out stage, right? So in that environment, yes, I do think the over reliance on just getting AI to succeed is getting in the way of culture, is making the organization question itself. All true. So how do we know this is happening? Look at the objectives of the organization. Look at the quarterly KPIs of the organization. How many of them are about using AI to come up with something remarkable? How many of them are about celebrating how people are finding innovative ways to use AI versus how many AI innovations have we come up with in the last quarter? And that for me is a big difference, right? The goals and the targets give us a lovely giveaway. Back to culture. You want to preserve your culture? Go back to identity, go back to mission, go back to vision, go back to purpose. Who are you? I think that's still an island worth preserving.
Great. Anybody else want to add very quickly? Anything about that?
I just wanted to jump in there. I totally agree with Krish. Go back to your first principles. Why is the organization there? What's in the value, what's in the mission, what's in the vision, and what is it that it's trying to accomplish? I totally agree. AI is not. It's a means to an end. That's what it is. And having conversations with your team members giving feedback, giving ideas. Again, I love talking about the fact that it's how do you collaborate, how do you co-create together as a team, because that would give people a high level of comfort in terms of what the organization is trying to do.
I mean, I think behind the question, there's like a philosophy of how an organization is going to approach AI, which I think you're bringing up, Raymond. It would be so nice if there was like a check and balance system where we could just run through a list of, is the organization staying in balance with AI? But I will say one thing I look for is agency. When have we given over our sense of agency to AI rather than having that collaborative, co-creative thought partnership? It's more of an engagement with a system rather than kind of having more of that passive reserved stance of, I'll call it, what can you do for me? In that classic input output way. So I'm talking more about an ethos of how we approach AI, but I think that ethos then also has a ripple effect into the tangibles of how we actually work with AI on a daily basis. I'll just say in short, this is personal for me. One practice I've picked up since working with AI is every morning I literally journal pen and paper because I know what it's doing in my brain and how it's going to keep some skill sets going for me as I use AI. And I offer that as a little tool, but I think more and more of that's going to become necessary as AI weaves into all of our workflows.
Wow. Wow. Well, I don't know about you all, but I am, especially in our audience, I am inspired. I am newly informed. There's so many takeaways that I have, and I think on behalf of Emergenetics, I am so incredibly grateful for the brilliance the three of you have shared here with us all today. I can tell by the questions it's been thought provoking. We need to have just another webinar. It's been absolutely outstanding, and from my perspective, of course, I think the reason it was so outstanding is you really represented an entire whole Emergenetics opportunity in this webinar. We had great conversation. We moved at an excellent pace. You were open to me throwing things out. You were flexible in that way. But most importantly, thank you. Thank you for your expertise and for sharing your expertise. Thank you from our structural place, the takeaways. There are some really tangible, concrete takeaways that I know our audience is going to walk away with. Thank you for the vision, your perspectives of the future and where we're headed and how we need to navigate that future. But most importantly, thank you for the time together to connect, to have conversations on really important topics that can help us all be better as a society in general. I'm just completely grateful to the crowd. I'm going to put up a QR code. Please know that will take you, I believe it takes you to the Emergenetics site, but we want to make sure you do get the copy of this webinar if you're interested in it or if you have any other questions, but please feel free to do so. So Annie, Raymond, Krish, thank you again to the team at Emergenetics. Thank you for your support. And to everybody else, have a wonderful, wonderful day ahead. And Annie, and
Yeah.
wonderful night's sleep.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.